Houston, this is Station. We are ready for the event.
Okay, Station, this is Houston. Are you picking me up on 2?
I am now. I had to adjust the volume on the ATU. I got you loud and clear.
Okay, we have you loud and clear as well. And Women of the Hour, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call Station for a voice check.
Station, this is producer Barry Finkel with Women of the Hour. How do you hear me?
I've got you loud and clear, and we're ready for the event.
Great. Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you. I just wanted to start by saying I'll be edited out of this interview. So if you could respond in full sentences, that would be ideal. And I want to start by having you introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and where you are.
Yeah, I'm astronaut Kate Rubins. It's great to be talking to you. I'm aboard the International Space Station, and we just flew off the coast of Japan. We're headed somewhere towards Patagonia, and we have been busy all day on Space Station doing a bunch of experiments and prepping our spacesuits to go out the door on a spacewalk next Saturday.
Oh, that is so exciting. So when you were little and you would look up at the stars growing up, did you ever imagine yourself being among them on the ISS? Was this always the goal?
Well, when I was growing up, when you are a little kid, you've got some career goals, of course, and I had 3. It was astronaut, biologist, and geologist. So I started out as a biologist, I wound up as an astronaut, and we'll see what happens from here.
Wow, that must feel really good. So I'm curious, what was going through your mind as you were launching into space? How is the experience different from how you might have imagined it?
Yeah, so we actually spend a lot of time in the simulator, and we launch on Soyuz rockets. So we are in the simulator with our Russian colleagues, often in Moscow. And the simulator feels very much like the real spacecraft. You climb in on the real day, and everything looks exactly as you're used to. The biggest difference there is the fact that you actually then start to feel the rocket underneath you at liftoff, and there's a lot of this going through your mind of, I can't believe I'm actually here, I can't believe we're actually on top of a rocket, and it's a pretty incredible experience to suddenly be hurled into space at 17,500 miles an hour.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. Can you give us a sensory description of being in space, the sights, smells, and tastes?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So space does have a little bit of a smell, and we got a chance to experience that when we docked the Dragon vehicle to the space station. So this was the SpaceX vehicle that launched recently. One of the things that we do is pressurize and depressurize the airlock that goes between those 2 vehicles. When you do that, you bring a little bit of that space smell into station, and so my commander called us over and told my crewmates and I to smell if we could smell space. It smells a little metallic, but nothing remarkable.
Not something you're going to make a candle out of anytime soon. So what are you most looking forward to on your upcoming spacewalk?
So I think, the spacewalk is this pretty amazing thing, actually, when you see all of the effort that goes into it. There's ground teams that spend months and years even preparing for this. The end goal is to add some structure to the space station. So we're going to put essentially what's a front porch onto the space station, and that's going to be this kind of docking adapter for new commercial crew vehicles. So I think one of the things that we're really looking forward to is the fact that we actually get to bolt a piece of hardware onto space station. For me, mostly, it's really the fact that I get to see all of these years of ground training and all these folks that have helped me along the way. They get to execute an EVA. I get to be part of that. That's I think just one of the most amazing things is to see what happens when NASA kicks into high gear, what they can accomplish, and how all these people come together and put a plan together.
Yeah. So what is an average day in space like for you?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's a busy day usually. We are absolutely maximizing our time up here, and so we might get up in the morning and do some various science ops. So, for example, right now I'm working on a lot of cell culture for heart cells. These are cardiomyocytes that we're actually growing on orbit. So they're no kidding heart cells. You can see them in the microscope. They start beating. They beat together, and you can actually see that. And we're culturing them on board the space station to try to understand the effects of microgravity. So you might have a science experiment in the morning. This afternoon, we're going to be plumbers. We are replacing some components on the toilet. And a few hours before that, I was putting together the spacesuits and doing a bunch of hardware checkout to get us ready to go on our spacewalk. So it's choose your own adventure. I mean, pick any kind of activity. We're probably doing it that day.
So when it comes to activities more for fun, I'm assuming that, things like board games are probably limited. So what is your favorite activity to do for fun in space?
Yeah, so that is a great question, and we don't the kinds of activities that we have on board the space station. You have a lot of things that you would have available to you on Earth. We have a little book library. We have some things that we can do in our free time. A lot of times the crew hangs out and just chats with each other at dinner. But there's not a lot of desire to just do the normal things that you would on a Saturday afternoon on the Earth. Because this is such an amazing place, we really find ourselves drawn to the cupola, and that's the big area with windows where we can look down at the Earth. And you could spend 6 months of Saturdays up here and never really do a normal Earth activity because we're so fascinated with watching the Earth and watching the planet go by. So I think most of our downtime activities are usually concerned with the really unique nature of space and the fact that we're in orbit around the planet.
How would you describe seeing an aurora from space?
It's amazing. An aurora from space is one of the most incredible things that you can imagine, and it's a little bit rare. So you end up, when you're looking out the window, you end up with these treasure hunts a little bit of times. Sometimes I wanted to see the pyramids. I saw those the other day from space. An aurora is something that you're looking out for because it only happens at certain times. We were lucky enough that we launched on the Soyuz, and we were actually orbiting the planet in our very small Soyuz spacecraft for 2 days before we docked for the space station. And I looked out the window one of the first nights when we were in orbital darkness, and I saw this beautiful green aurora, and it just happened to be that way. We were looking for it for a while and only recently saw it up here on space station. And so it's gorgeous. It's amazing. I'm a scientist, and so I enjoy thinking about magnetic fields and what this exactly means for what's going on in terms of geomagnetic issues on our planet. But I think maybe not everybody has that same response.
How has your relationship with Earth changed while being on the ISS?
I think one of the ways that your relationship with Earth changes is the fact that you can see so much. So I was narrating to some family and friends a little while ago. We had a really nice pass over the U.S., and I saw some areas in Vancouver, and I was really interested in looking at the mountains and looking at Vancouver and Seattle. And I noticed off in the distance some lakes, and I was thinking, gosh, I need to get better on my geography. I better go look that up. That's a really big lake. It was the Great Lakes, and so that is the scope. That's the way the scope completely changes. I mean, you can see out of one eye, you can see the West Coast. Out of your other eye, you can actually see the Great Lakes. And so that kind of perspective where you're seeing whole continents, you're just seeing this beauty of the planet come before your eyes. I think it does something really deep in the human brainstem, and it definitely changes us a little bit.
So can you tell us briefly how you wound up joining the ISS crew?
Yeah, so I applied to NASA and was part of the 2009 astronaut class. We come in and we do a lot of basic training as astronaut candidates, and then when we get selected for a mission, we actually train for about 2.5 years for the specific mission that we're going to do. And so we do a lot of training at NASA, but we also train at the partner agency sites. So I was talking about the training in Moscow. We train in Japan, we train in Canada, and we train in Europe as well. And after you go through all of that, you have a pretty good understanding, I think, of what we're going to do on a daily basis on the space station. So we get all this training done, and a little bit of it we learn on the job up here. But there's not a whole lot that we're directing of the selection process or anything like that. That all comes from the ground, and we just help them out the best we can, getting this incredible amount of experiments, spacewalks, cargo transfer work, all of the things we're doing on Space Station.
So you have a crew up there, but there aren't necessarily all that many people in space. Do you ever feel lonely?
You know, we really don't. It's actually amazing. The space station is huge, and so you might not have eyes on every single crew member, but we kind of know where everybody is and what they're doing. We'll be working together a lot of the time. So, for example, today, two of my Russian colleagues were down in the European segment doing an ultrasound experiment. So we're working on the spacesuits, and we'd float by and watch them doing an ultrasound experiment. You really just get the sense that you're working together all the time. So it doesn't feel lonely. It can be a little busy up here. You've got people flying from module to module getting their stuff done. So it's a lot of enjoyment, and you really don't get that sense of loneliness.
Do you feel a need to create a private space in that situation then?
We really don't. We have our little cubicle where our sleeping bags are hung up, and so we all have a place to sleep. And the work up here is so fascinating and so engaging. I think a lot of the stuff that you might feel on the ground where I need to get away from it all, I just want my own spot, it doesn't translate up here. Any sense of isolation can immediately be cured by going and looking out the window and seeing everybody on the planet. There's actually, I would say, more feeling of connectedness than there is of isolation or need to sequester yourself from any of that.
You are the 60th woman in space, which is pretty incredible. Did you talk to any other women astronauts and get any advice from them before you launched?
Well, I talked to a whole bunch of astronauts before I launched. I think that's a really good practice in general. So there's actually not a major difference in terms of the kind of job that we're doing up here. It's essentially no impact. So I talked to women and men about all of their experiences, about the things that we've talked about launching, what people thought of the work, their tips and tricks for getting through the workday. And the advice from fellow astronauts and folks that have flown before is really invaluable. That's what allows us to get up here and hit the ground running and get so much accomplished in our first few days and weeks up on board Space Station.
So do you ever feel isolated being the only woman on board, or is that not an issue for you as much?
I frankly don't really think about the fact that I'm the only woman on board. I think it's just, we're a crew. We're up here. There's no difference in my job description. So it's not something that comes to mind. It's not something, I think that's maybe the same question as does somebody feel isolated being the only Army astronaut up here? Or does somebody feel isolated being the only Japanese astronaut up here? It's part of who we are. We bring our own personal characteristics to the table, but we're together up here as a crew, and there's really not a separation or isolation or a need to feel different.
That's great. I'm wondering, how do you cope with being separated from family and friends? It's pretty much the farthest distance you could be from them.
Well, so there actually are times where we pass directly over, for example, our hometown or where we live or where relatives are, and they'll oftentimes use an app on the ground that they can use to spot the space station. And NASA has this app, but your listeners can go look it up and see if we happen to be flying overhead at a good time. And so I get a lot of notes from people that say, hey, I just saw you fly overhead. So you actually, in some ways, can feel closer to some of your far-flung friends and relatives. And we have a really fantastic way of staying connected with people up here. So we can have video chats with our family and friends. And it's a really fun time. We get to bring a little bit of the space station life to them. So it's not as remote as you would think. It's a fascinating, unique environment, and it is a remote and extreme environment, but it gets brought a lot closer by some of the human contact.
So what do you miss back on Earth? Are there little things you really miss, as small as a dish you really love, or a sense?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not the only one to say this, but I do miss a lot of the sounds and smells and feeling of being outside. So we have a closed loop system here, which is actually a fantastic science experiment, if you will, and understanding of how we recycle air, water. We're at 90% recycling here. So we recycle all of our water, we recycle all of our air, but you end up living in a place with no weather. It's always the same temperature up here. We don't really feel a breeze on our face. We can see the planet, but you don't necessarily see something like trees or a field up close. And so that's something that we miss a little bit. And you, I think on the ground maybe would tend to complain about the weather. Up here, we'd be thrilled to be standing in the middle of a rainstorm. So I think that's the one thing, is that the actual sensation of being somewhere where you've got, you feel outside and you can feel nature. But at the same time, having this closed-loop environmental system is fascinating, and we're really learning a lot about how you can purify air and water and how you can minimize your use of resources and keep that constantly purified and recycling. We're learning a whole lot about that. It's engineering, science. It's a lot. It's one giant experiment, I think, on the space station.
Fascinating. So, funny last question from us. Have you updated your address on social media and elsewhere to read space?
I did send an email out of office message that said I'm currently off the planet and unable to get back to your email.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much. This has been excellent, and best of luck on your upcoming spacewalk.
Thank you. It's really great to talk to you. I want to say hi to all your listeners, and thanks very much for joining us on the International Space Station today.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Women of the Hour. And Station, we are now resuming operational audio communications.